Hi, I'm Scott Buttrell with the Trussville Tribune. Thank you for joining us. I'm here today with Alabama Attorney General and Republican candidate for Attorney General, Steve Marshall. Steve, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the invitation.
Appreciate having you here. Let's talk a little bit about how you went into office. That's been a campaign topic, so to speak, and you were appointed by Governor Bentley, and then obviously, Governor Bentley ran into a little bit of a criminal problem. Can you explain kind of how that process worked from your standpoint as Attorney General?
Yeah, you know, I was a long-time district attorney, almost 16 years
for Marshall County. Should have mentioned that.
So definitely, you know, within my law enforcement peers, both prosecutors and those who work in law enforcement itself, had done an awful lot of work in that area. For the DAs, I served on their national board for the National District Attorneys Association, represented Alabama, and so I've been very engaged in what was going on in the public safety sphere. Mm-hmm. You know, when the word came that Luther Strange was potentially going to be, a candidate for Senate, several of the DAs said, this is something that you ought to consider. And I'd considered running. I was not as if somehow or another this was not potentially something for me.
Right.
And definitely made sure that, you know, my interest was known, had the opportunity to be able to interview with the governor, share a vision of what I saw from the office, not only from the public safety side, but also the areas that an attorney general could advance the interest of the state of Alabama and the quality of life for people here. And very grateful for the fact that he was willing to appoint me. Now, he never asked for anything, didn't demand that I do anything other than to serve the people of Alabama. And that's exactly what we did, you know, when we learned that there was the investigation of the governor, and that was on really basically the first full day of the job. I immediately recused, appointed Ellen Brooks, who was a longtime prosecutor in Montgomery, to be able to do the investigation. And then I think less than 8 weeks later, Kay Ivey was the governor of Alabama.
There have been suggestions that there was a quid pro quo there, so to speak, but did the governor ever ask you for anything during the appointment process when he was talking to different people? Did he even bring up the possibility that he may be facing criminal charges?
Never brought it up. In fact, I love being the DA of Marshall County. Yeah. Beautiful area, long standing there, and would have been happy to be able to end my career in that capacity. And so if the governor had said anything like that, there would have been absolutely no reason for me to even walk into that position. But he was incredibly professional, asked the substantive questions about what the role of Attorney General should be and what, you know, we ought to expect for the people of Alabama. And again, we allowed for those professionals who had already been working on the case in my office to be led by Ellen Brooks to decide the direction it would go.
Let's talk about the time you've been in office since that appointment. What do you feel like is probably your greatest accomplishment since serving as Attorney General for the state?
Well, you know, one of the first things I had to do is figure out what I thought the role of the Attorney General was, because you know, you and I actually talked earlier about kind of some old Alabama politics. Yeah. And if you think about Bill Baxley, you know, Baxley was the representative of that kind of historic role of the top cop, right? You know, being the chief law enforcement officer in the state. And so clearly from the perspective of most in the state, they see the Attorney General as the chief law enforcement officer. And so one of the areas that we needed to make sure that we had our footprint on when we came here is to be able to grasp important issues for law enforcement and victims and what we could do to help them. And so one of the things that I'm most proud of is the Fair Justice Act that we passed while I've been Attorney General. You know, I can give you an example. Tommy Arthur, who many people have heard of in the state, committed a heinous crime. Committed that crime when I was 17 years old. We executed Tommy Arthur when I was 53. That's not justice, and that's not serving the victims of this state. And so the Fair Justice Act streamlines death penalty appeals, gives additional protections to a criminal defendant so that they have representation where they were not guaranteed before, but will allow those appeals to be able to go quicker so that ultimately the appellate's courts have the chance to review a case when it's fresher and when that record is clear, and then also allows for victims to know that they're not going to have to wait 30 or 40 years before there'll be an ultimate resolution when a judge has decided that death is the ultimate punishment. And so very proud of the fact that we were able to get that bill passed. But beyond that, I think the AG has a role that not only sort of affects issues directly inside the state, but also being able to work on cases outside of the state of Alabama that matter to the people of this state. And so the other thing that I'm probably most proud of is the fact that we have chosen to be in certain fights that I think matter to the people of Alabama, whether it's the census lawsuit that we filed because if we count those who are in this country illegally for purposes of congressional apportionment, we're going to lose a congressional seat. We don't need to do that. And in fact, if we lose that congressional seat, you go back to your old civics lessons, that's one of the votes on the Electoral College. Right. And the way that our expert tells us is California is going to gather that vote, and I surely don't want California to have our vote for president. So we've been involved in that fight, and I think that's something I think is important. But also to be able to, for example, today we led the fight with a brief in the Supreme Court involving the city of Pensacola, who's had a cross in a park for over 70 years, and it was challenged. Mm-hmm. And those that want it out of there believe it violates the Constitution. I don't think it does. And so we've been able to lead a fight there on religious liberty issues. And so I think it's those discussions that we've had outside the state that relate to Second Amendment, that relate to religious liberty, that relate to the right to life. Those are the other things that I'm also very proud of.
This state has been led down the religious liberty path by Roy Moore, and he had a legal philosophy in that regard that never ended well. Do you think there is a legitimate legal fight for religious freedom that has been missed in the past?
Oh, I think there's clearly opportunities to be able to do that matter. I'll give you an example of one of the cases we were involved with. There is a pregnancy center in the city of Baltimore mm-hmm. that there was an ordinance filed that said that center that works with young women to talk about bringing their child to term, that requires them to provide abortion information as well. Not only is there a First Amendment issue there, there's also a religious liberty issue there. That's an important fight that we prevailed on, that we were successful in joining that clinic and being able to push back on that particular issue. Or, for example, the cake baker in Colorado who said, I don't want to use my talents to bake a cake in a way that's inconsistent with my religious beliefs. And we believe standing up for somebody like that is important. And so, we want to be smart about those battles. We want to make sure that we're fighting the right fights. At the same time, even if we lose, many times those fights are worth fighting. Right now, for example, we're engaged in a discussion of upholding a bill that passed the legislature a few years ago relating to dismemberment abortion, which is one of the most horrific and horrendous acts that can occur in our culture. And I believe that's an important bill and an important statute. We've lost thus far, but yet we now potentially have the ability to take that case to the Supreme Court. And while we may not win, I think it's a fight worth fighting. And I think those are the battles that we need to be able to continue to be able to look toward.
Let's talk a little bit more about when you took the position of Attorney General, when you stepped in. Under your predecessor, there was some pretty well publicized infighting among staff attorneys in the Attorney General's office and politics at play in there. When you stepped in, were you able to get control of that? Are there still issues among attorneys there? Do you feel like you've brought that office on the same page?
Well, I'd love for you to talk to the lawyers there because I think they could give you the best answer. But I think two things that were important to me when I got there is, number one, to create a culture of excellence. Mm-hmm. That's the standard for us, and that was what we're going to do. My mantra to them, one of the things I told them on the first day, is I want you to get a little better every day. And that was important for me. The other thing, and I know this may sound strange, but I also told them is let's have fun together. Let's enjoy one another. Let's appreciate what we do, and let's have the opportunity to, outside of the professional role that we play, to understand that we're part of one mission and one team. And that's not to say that my predecessor didn't enforce that, but yet it was important for me in creating a culture to be able to do it. And I think if you talk to the people there right now, they'll tell you, number one, that Clay Crenshaw has been a remarkable chief deputy. Clay started working there when he was in college, has kind of grown up through the ranks, and he got a standing ovation when I appointed him as my chief deputy after the third week that I was there. And then beyond that, we've done things to make sure that, number one, lawyers understand that we're going to treat them like lawyers and professionals, and we've done that, and then have high expectations for them coming forward. So I think one of the things that the public at large won't see, but yet if you were in the office with the 160 odd employees that we have there, they'll tell you that the environment in which they're working right now is a really good one. And I'm appreciative of the support that I've received from the employees there who want to be able to see me stay.
Let's talk about an issue that's facing the state, a dire issue that is facing the state. I've lost a younger brother to opioid abuse. It's affected your family. Right. It has affected so many people in this state directly and probably almost everyone indirectly. As Attorney General, how do we bring this under control? And I know you've taken some action so far to fight this fight, but where do we go, and how do we control this epidemic that's right now controlling us?
Great point, because if you look at it, and it's not just an Alabama issue, obviously it's nationally. I think it is disturbing when we are the greatest country in the world and our life expectancy has gone down in the last 2 years. A lot of that attributable to the overdose deaths that we're seeing. When I walked into office in February of 2017, we had no strategic plan to deal with the opioid issue. It's not to say that there weren't people working on it, but yet there was no comprehensive plan or strategy for us going forward. And literally, I think it was almost the second week that Kay Ivey became governor, I went over and I shared with her, for example, that Alabama's #1 per capita in opioid prescriptions, that our overdose deaths have quadrupled over about an 8-year period. And just told her the stories that not only I learned as a prosecutor, but candidly in my own life and what I observed from my wife, who had chronic migraines and other health conditions that caused her to have opioids in her life. And so Governor Ivey was gracious enough to say, I want you to lead that charge. And along with the head of public health and mental health, we chaired the committee that worked basically beginning in August of last year. She gave us about 4.5 months. If you know Governor Ivey, she believes in getting something done, and that's what she expected of us. And we delivered a report to her with roughly 27 recommendations about what we could do in Alabama going forward. And that's across the continuum. I mean, there's no silver bullet here, but yet it's a public health issue, it's a mental health issue, it's a law enforcement issue, and it's a community engagement issue. And really pleased that we've seen already some positive strides. Number one, that if you look at our 5-year rolling average that we had last year, an almost 23% reduction in the number of opioid prescriptions in Alabama than we had 5 years previously. That's a really positive step. We've seen good movement from our Board of Medical Examiners in increasing the standards on doctors to be able to look at the PDMP. That's that prescription drug monitoring database that controls all of our prescribing history, so to make sure that they're looking for those who are doctor shopping and subject to addiction. And then one of the things that has come from that is that we did not have a fentanyl trafficking bill, which that is the drug that, a gram of sugar is basically a packet, or a gram of fentanyl, a packet of sugar. That's enough to kill, hundreds of people, basically, because a dose of fentanyl is basically 2 grams of sand. And so that's how powerful that particular drug is. And so for us to be able to get a trafficking bill was important to give law enforcement that tool. But the other thing that we saw in the most recent legislative session, and Danny was very helpful for us in the legislature in being able to pass within the appropriation $1.2 million to modernize the PDMP, to give doctors and pharmacists better information. And so we've seen already progress in implementation of that plan. It was important for us that when we delivered it, right before the new year, that we then immediately moved into a way to be able to measure what we were doing and to implement that plan. And so that work is ongoing and continues. I've been really pleased with the cooperative effort that I've had from Lynn Brashear, who's our head of mental health, who's been a remarkable leader. Dr. Harris, who runs public health, who obviously sees this day to day, and the response that we received from both of those agencies along with others in being able to make a dent in this. This is, again, going to be an ongoing issue. Had the ability to meet with Kellyanne Conway here a couple of weeks ago when I spoke at the White House to talk about the federal efforts and along with what we're doing in Alabama. I think there is now a focus for us. There is a plan going forward. Our job now is to make sure that we implement that plan.
Did you walk away from that Washington meeting feeling like you had the full federal support? President Trump hasn't made a big deal of it, and we covered that meeting in the comments you made there, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, we can speak to nothing but positive things about the discussion we've had during the Trump administration while they're there. Interestingly, I went up not long after I was appointed to meet with the folks at the Office of National Drug Control Policy to say, what are you doing here that we could potentially implement in Alabama? And frankly, they were still working on where they were. There were no federal recommendations as well. And so we've been able to have, not only in this area, but others, a very good relationship with the Trump administration. They've been very responsive. The other thing, it's been very wonderful to have Jeff Sessions as our Attorney General, because he's made this a priority as well. And so we're able to work directly with General Sessions on these issues. And so could not have asked for a better partner than we've had in the Trump administration.
Now I'm going to ask you a question it seems like every elected official has trouble with. What's the biggest mistake you've made since you've been in office?
I think the biggest mistake has been trying to do too much too quick. There's a lot of issues that we deal with in Alabama. I'm very passionate about human trafficking, the opioid issue, violent crime, public corruption. And one of the things to recognize is coming from a job as a district attorney where I was trying cases. Today the Alabama Supreme Court affirmed a capital murder case where I convicted a gentleman of killing his pregnant wife. That was kind of the work that I was doing and was very much directly involved every day in everything that we were doing in that office. My biggest mistake is realizing I couldn't do that here, and maybe mistake or realization and having the ability as a leader to figure out what I needed to be directly engaged with, what I could be able to delegate to those around me, and how it is that I can most effectively move the ball forward. And so, one of the things that has really become a realization for me is if I think about the greatest leadership example that I know, that's in my Savior, Jesus Christ. Jesus changed the world by investing in 12 people, one of which eventually left. So it was basically 11, right? And so if that's sort of Jesus's example of leadership, then I need to be able to focus on sort of influencing those people, influencing the narrative of those issues I'm involved with and the culture in which I work. And if I can do those things well, then I think I'll serve the people of Alabama well.
If the voters give you 4 more years, what would be your number one priority?
I think we need to continue to be sort of being that voice of public corruption just because we're uniquely situated there. Not that local DAs aren't able to do that, but yet I think both from a investigation side and prosecution side, that needs to be one of our areas of focus. Unfortunately, there's a history in Alabama where that has to be a priority, and so we'll continue to do it. But yet we'll still be doing some of the same things that we're doing now, just continuing to push the ball forward, to making sure that we implement that plan going forward with opioids, that we continue with our violent crime initiative, trying to be able to partner with local and federal law enforcement to work on those particular areas of interest in communities. And then beyond that, we need to make sure that Alabama's voice is heard outside of the border.
Where are we on the state ethics law? You've taken some heat over not moving as fast as some people would like to see you move on there. Where are we there, and where do you see that going?
We had the bill that we drafted that was dropped by Senator Marsh. They formed a study commission, which Tom Albritton and I serve as co-chair. We met actually this week to continue those discussions. Whether or not we'll ever come up with a consensus there, I don't know, but ultimately we're going to have a plan to present to the legislature to say, here's what we think we need to be able to do in this state. But the one thing I think gets lost is that as a result of the Hubbard conviction, the Alabama Supreme Court affirmed that, the Court of Criminal Appeals, it's now I guess potentially could be at the Supreme Court, affirmed that our ethics laws work and that they were applicable in that case and that the conviction stood other than one count that they overturned. And so, to the extent that somebody wants a wholesale change.
There was a request for some clarification also.
There was from the court, but yet it did say that in that situation, in that case, there was nothing unconstitutional about the act itself. And so we'll continue to work. We'll continue to try to be able to provide a voice, but sort of clarity and strength are our two sort of bedrocks is where that needs to go forward, and whether or not we'll be able to have consensus with others that are part of that group, yet to be seen.
Your campaign has been one of the more unusual ones in state history, and in a state like Alabama, that's kind of saying something. But you have a lot of your personal life has been put out for public display, just due to events that you have gone through in the heat of a campaign. And I know from our conversation a minute ago, it's not all been emotional lows. There have been emotional highs, and you had a great experience this weekend with your daughter, within the last couple of weeks with your daughter. So how has that affected you as a man going forward?
I guess a couple of ways. First of all, I lost the love of my life, and that is a hole that exists and will continue to exist. And so she was also my biggest fan. But the idea, it was interesting. I've been asked the question, did you think about dropping out? And one of the last things that Bridget, my wife, gave me is after the first vote before the runoff was a note where she said, you're the man for the job and you're the man for Alabama. And that, when she died, there was never a doubt in my mind that is where she would want me to continue. So, that was a discussion my daughter and I had. And so, that is a void personally that's been hard, continues to be hard. And honestly, when this campaign is over, I'll probably want to get away for a little bit and to continue to process that. But on the opposite side, has been the remarkable sort of strength that I've been shown from the people of the state. And this is not in a partisan way. You know, people don't walk up and say, I'm a Democrat and I know what happened to your wife, or I'm a Republican and I know what happened to your wife. It is people that have just walked up and said, number one, I've prayed for you. Mm-hmm. Number one, I've thought about you. And, you know, throughout, as much as I've grieved, I've never doubted God's sovereignty and God's goodness. And so it's been very important for us as a family to figure out where in this tragedy that we suffered can we make an impact and can we have an opportunity for good things. And so part of the affirmation I've had since are people that have come up, even the other day when we had our law enforcement forum in Montgomery, a law enforcement officer came up and said, I know that press conference you had was hard, and it really was the hardest thing I've ever done. But you saved a life. And he told me the story about how I'd saved a life. Or, you know, the messages and the texts that I've gotten from people that said, as a result of what happened, you caused us to have a discussion that we haven't had as a family, or you caused us to take action that we haven't taken as a family. And so, you know, at some point, if we're able to win in November and feel confident that we will, that's a unique platform that I'm going to have as Attorney General, is that not only, you know, from the professional side of my house do I have the ability to impact the lives of people in the state, hopefully from a very positive way, but maybe have a platform personally to be able to share a story and to shed light on the issue of mental illness, you know, to try to help deal with this question of the stigma that's associated with it, and to create a dialogue and a narrative that can advance the issue going forward. And so, you know, we've still got a ways to go. And, you know, there was a void for my daughter and I when she got married this weekend. She was a beautiful bride and made her dad proud. And, you know, you desperately wish that my wife had been there to see it. But that being said, it is one that has been a day-to-day struggle, trying to make sure that able to focus on the job, desperately missing somebody that, again, I wished was there. And at the same time, doing it in a very public way makes it very, very unique and different. And what my hope is, as a result of what people have observed, is that maybe we've had some influence in a way that's been consistent with what we've heard. Never had more hugs in my life than I've had, you know, over the last 4 months. And, you know, you can palpably feel the prayer that people have lifted us up with. But at the same time, it's one going forward that I think to be able to celebrate her life, we have to do things that allow for others not to suffer what we suffered. And so we'll see where it's going. I don't like being that asterisk in some ways in Alabama political history, because there's clearly no playbook about what you do when your wife passes away less than a month before an election. But what I do know is that she believed in me and that she loved me, and that is affirming during a period of time in which it's difficult. You know, you laugh. I mean, if you recall during the campaign, I was accused of being a Porch Creek Indian and, having a bumper sticker on a car that wasn't true. And yet, you know, you just kind of have to shake that off and understand that politics is something that's going to take place. You wish that, you know, prosecutors talk about the fact that facts are stubborn things. Yeah. And so as somebody that's grown up in the world of having to prove something in court, you know, sometimes being involved in a campaign has been frustrating for me because I believe in facts and we've tried to do it above board and go and tell the truth. But at the same time, the people of Alabama saw through what was a very negative campaign. I think we were hugely successful in the vote that we got, especially in the runoff. And I hope they'll continue to see that as we go forward.
Well, you know, the way this election is going right now, being accused of being a Porch Creek Indian may be one of the nicest things anybody's ever said about a political opponent. But you're right. You had a really tough primary, and now you've got a general election, and you're facing someone who's kind of a household name, at least through his father and Joe Siegelman. If you had an opportunity, and we're about to give you this opportunity, to address our readers and viewers directly, 30, 45 seconds, or as long as you need, what would you say to them?
Well, first of all, I want to say that I've appreciated the opportunity for the last 20 months to serve as your Attorney General. It has been the greatest professional privilege of my life, and I'm grateful for the opportunity that I've been given to be able to serve. But within that, there are certain expectations that you have of me that I hope that you've seen. And number one is that I've been a balls and strikes guy, that my job is to be able to enforce the law and to do it fairly and do it the right way. We believe that that's something that our record establishes, that we've tried to stand up and fight on those issues that matter to the people of this state, whether it be constitutional issues like the Second Amendment, like the right to life, like issues of religious liberty, but also to be able to stand up for victims of crime, as we did even this week, to talk to the parole board about things that were concerning to both the governor and I going forward. And so we'll continue to work on the issues that we've been involved with. We'll continue to be able to represent the people of Alabama with integrity, and are grateful for the opportunity to be able to engage in public service.
Attorney General Steve Marshall, we appreciate you taking the time to visit us here in Trussville, and we thank you for joining us. We hope you'll be back the next time we bring a political commentary to you.